Hello, my name is Aldo Matza. Welcome to my podcast, Shaping Your Journey. Conversations with specialists, friends, and great artists in the music industry. Today I have the special guest, and always an honor to have people like him who's kind of been one of my heroes and people who kind of set the pace from back in the 60s. It feels like 100 years ago, but it's really nice to know as you're shaping your journey, how do we shape our journey? Who the people are that help us shape the journey? What decisions we make? What comes in front of us? And I invite you to subscribe. Help us share the word. Please help me welcome Michael Shrieve, the original Santana drummer, and of course we all remember Woodstock. Before we continue on the conversation, would you mind just giving a little bit of your background that may not be online or might be just something you want to add from the beginning, and then we can carry on the conversation in the journey.
Well, I would say, Aldo, that most people know me from the film Woodstock. As much as I try to get away from it, and as much as I try to do all through my life, I'm always. That's what people know me for. I'm always grateful that people appreciate that. And it took me about 35 years old to accept that, when nobody would seem to be listening to anything else I did. And so I remember one day I was living in New York, and it just hit me finally. I said, you got to get over this thing about resenting people about Woodstock. And I just came to the conclusion that I should be grateful that I was a part of something that moved so many people, and just carry on with your life, do what you want to do, and don't worry about it. Just approach it with more gratitude than trying to convince people have you heard what I've done lately or anything like that. And so that's been my journey. Since Woodstock is, it's a blessing in disguise. You've got to be grateful, but you also, it's like a child actor known for a single role or something like that. And so I'm fine with all of it now. And that's been probably the start of my journey, of course, was being in Santana, and then the success of the Woodstock film.
Let's go back a little bit before that, because we know, like, for all of us, that was the beginning of Michael Shrieve in all our lives and what you've done. And honestly, and it's great what you're saying, and it's important that we understand that, because all of us may have on some level of that. I mean, that was kind of a moon landing. It is. You have to accept it. We move forward, and you did, and you really inspired. It really inspired, and there was a whole other thing that happened. That was in 1969. But let's go back a little bit. Take us back to before that. What took you to that point? I think that's also interesting.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I began playing drums one day when in 8th grade, when I got kicked out of class because I forget what I was doing, either making a joke or banging on the desk. Like, I wasn't thinking of being a drummer. I was probably just full of what do you call it? What's that thing when you can't pay attention?
ADHD.
Anyway, I got kicked out and sent to the principal's office, and the principal, gave me the proper scolding and said, "Okay, get back to class." And as I was headed back to class, I passed the band room, and at the edge of the band room, close to the door, it kind of looks like the back of your room back there, plus timpani and other drums, and I just stopped in my tracks, and they were rehearsing, and I knew right then that something had happened to me. So I went back to the classroom, and I was late, and I got in trouble again. But after school, I went to the local carpet store, and I got some samples, and then I went and bought some drumsticks, and so I drumsticks so I could play on the carpets, and that's how I started. But then I did start to take lessons and pursue it without having drums for many years, actually. Um, and I finally got a snare drum from my paper route, and a Japanese snare drum, and then I had enough to order another one. And so I was even playing in bands, but I didn't have a drum set yet. And the first drum set I ever got was after high school. I went on a tour of Nevada and North and South Dakota, a cover band. But I saved up the money from that tour and bought my first drums in somewhere in North Dakota, and I had my first drum set, and those were the same drums that I played at Woodstock.
Those silver sparkle Ludwigs, I remember, right?
The champagne, yeah,
Oh,
champagne
champagne.
sparkle,
Okay, because I had a
yeah,
silver sparkle ones. Yes,
yeah. And
nice.
so that was that. And then when I got back, my interest changed, and I started getting a little more serious and playing, the, um, with other bands and things. And as you grow, your tastes grow as well. But that was right in the middle of the hippie movement, and I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area. So all of those bands, Grateful Dead and Jefferson Airplane and Big Brother and all those kind of groups were happening, and they were kind of like aliens to me. I remember going to see concert um an outdoor concert, and there was Jefferson Airplane, and it was also Santana, strangely enough. But I'd look at the guys in the Jefferson Airplane, like the bass player Jack Cassidy. He always had these cool shades on. He just looked so cool, and I would think, you get to be like that, How's a young guy get to be that cool? And so anyway, I had some good teachers, and you know I practiced a lot. And I went to junior college and had, played in the big band, and at night I would play in clubs, even though I was underage. So it became an obsession,
Nice.
like everybody who ever comes up doing it. I mean, you're under your bed at night, sneaking from your parents, reading the Ludwig catalog. Like how much is a drum key, how much is this, and how much is that. You know, it's like it's how it is.
Classic, classic. Yes.
Yeah.
And it's nice. And was there any particular drummer at the time who hit you? Because when I was watching you I went back and watched some of the footage of Woodstock. I mean, I saw like Louis Bells and Buddy Rich in there.
Mhm.
Besides, some of what you were doing was more, of course, eighth note oriented and more Cuban style. I won't say the word Latin, but more Cuban because you're surrounded by people who were either from Puerto Rico or Cuba influenced. So there was a lot of that around you, and I could hear it. But it was like Max Roach, Buddy Rich. That's what I was seeing. Is that am
Yeah,
I
you're
wrong?
absolutely right. I mean, I got into the big band drummers first. Of course, there was Ringo, but I was into Gene Krupa, and then I was into Louis Bellson and Buddy Rich was and I studied out of Buddy Rich's book as well. So I played in rudimental, like police corps stuff. And I loved the rudiments, and I sincerely enjoyed practicing the rudiments. And um it's very interesting, Aldo, as you can imagine. So when you're 16 doing that, and then when you're 73, what I am now, when I practice that stuff, I approach it in a different way, because now you have wisdom, and you can practice it like a meditation. Um, I mean, you have to look at things differently in order to keep inspired. And but naturally, I think, I know that it's supposed to sound really even, and and I've switched my grip from traditional to matched, which I still can't get as well as I had with the traditional. It's a real challenge, even though I've been doing it for years, but I enjoyed the practice still. And but yes, you're right. You know, I saw all these rock groups. I mean, I was into the rock guys too. I was a big fan of Dino Danelli, and the
Oh,
Rascals.
yes, finally. He was one of after Ringo, Dino was my other guy, and I used to emulate him. Everybody would say, "Hey, you look and sound like Dino Denali," which made me proud because they did such great stuff. That band was amazing.
Yeah, he
After the
could play,
Beatles,
right?
yeah.
Yeah. And so along with that, I also loved like Ray Charles. And so because I could see that Dino like learned those kind of beats, like that like What I Say and the Bobby Blue Bland stuff that um so I got into all of that R&B stuff as well. That was one of my big things was every time James Brown came out with a single, I would learn that. It was my thing to learn it and then go down to a club, even though I was like 16, that somehow I'd go in and show off that I could play this groove, and the brothers would be down there, and it's like, oh, okay, this little white boy, all right. And so I love the rock stuff. I love big band and the R&B stuff. I was totally into. It wasn't until I got into junior college where I had the experience of playing with a big band, which was just a whole nother zone. And I had a great teacher in the bass player in that group, and really explained to me groove and where it could be right in the middle or forward or back. But when you're driving a big band, it's like driving a you know 8-wheeler. Yeah,
And it's funny because when you're listening to that Soul Sacrifice solo you did, and I mean the whole song, I mean you were playing like a big band drummer. That whole
yeah,
approach, you had great technique, and you were really approaching it like a big band drummer, which I thought really was really interesting in that context.
yeah. I mean, listen, Aldo, when I got in Santana, the only thing I had done Latin wise was play out of Ted Reed's Latin Rhythms book, you know? And I never played with Latin musicians before I got in Santana. When you listen to anything I did with Santana, I never played Latin rhythms. I played a swing rhythm on the cymbal. I mean, always. So if they were going, you know, playing a one one co or whatever, I would everything like I swung, the most thing would be bang, boom, boom, so it was more like What I Say, you know
Right.
than Tito Puente or something like that,
Yeah.
and at that point not many drummers played in the authentic Latin groups.
Right.
Um, but the jazz drummers were in that they were in that direction, and in that period in that college is when I found out where the real stuff that was happening at that time, the most exciting, fresh stuff was the small groups like Miles and Coltrane and a host of others. And then that changed my whole trajectory. And I just went there, Tony, Jack, Force Flower, you know, um, and that became my obsession for years and years and years. In fact, I don't consider myself a rock drummer whatsoever, and rock drummers know that, you know. Um, I mean, I don't have that that power. I just never like got that,
But you
I've
had the
even taken some
finesse.
lessons from some big rock guys, like how do I get more, you know, because a lot of single strokes and my thing was double strokes and so it's interesting.
I have a question regarding just taking you back a little bit to the Woodstock thing, which was like, revolutionary. It was like that Sunday night on Ed Sullivan's show with the Beatles and Ringo Starr. Woodstock thing was the same thing, in your particular case. It was interesting when I listened back, and it was Jose Chapito who was playing the conga, correct?
Yes, yes.
And
Both of them were playing congas on that tune.
okay, because that was beautiful, beautiful playing, and I'm listening to it. I said that's kind of a variation of a rumba, a wawanko, that they were doing, and he set you up. I mean, he did a fantastic solo, and this is like the real deal. And he
Yeah.
set you up beautifully, and you just that transition that you took with it, that took it. How much did you guys work out those things, or was it all spontaneous?
You know, we rehearsed a lot. We rehearsed every single day when we were at home in San Francisco. It was very serious. One of the things I said in my speech for the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was, when I joined the band, I was actually living in my parents' house, and they heard me in a studio. It's a long story, but um, I left my parents and went up with them where they were living. And I said, I soon found out this was no hippie love thing. This was like a street gang, and the message was music, and the it was like a street gang, and the weapon was music.
Okay.
It was very serious. I mean, they were different people than I had met before, and they were not like the hippies. They were not, that was the whole environment. But we rehearsed every day. Same with Sly Stone. They rehearsed every day. Gregor Rico told me that it was very serious. So we worked out not specific transitions, but Chapito is also from Nicaragua, so his stuff was different. And Carabello is of Puerto Rican heritage, but really born in San Francisco. So, and he didn't play normal either. So, and me playing the swing thing, and it just made it completely unique. I loved that I could fit in that way and stay out of the way without trying to play necessarily like a cowbell rhythm on the bell or something like that. They were already covering that, right?
Right.
So really, when I approached it, I just tried to stay out of the way,
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, and just make a tight weave with the rhythm. That
Yeah.
was the goal. And yeah, so with that tune Soul Sacrifice, I was required to play a solo every day, and so I had to work on that. I mean, that's a whole other world, soloing. And um you know, I practiced all the time. We practiced all the time, and so, the chops were there, and they got better and better, even after as Santana grew too. I've done. I keep telling people the Woodstock solo is it's not one of my better solos, and I have video to show. Like a year later at Tanglewood or '73 in Kyoto. But I get it because the film, the video matched with the audio. I get it. It's passionate. The band is like whoop, on fire.
Oh yes.
And, it wasn't like they had ever seen that at Woodstock. And we didn't even have a record out.
Right. That's true. That's true. Wow.
We didn't have a record out. So we got to that crowd without them knowing any of the music as well.
Wow. That was like a sledgehammer over everybody's head at one time.
It was perfect because it was so tribal anyway, right?
Right.
The
Right.
crowd was like had this feeling of a tribe, like it's us versus them,
Yeah.
and our music was, tribal.
Yeah, and here's something interesting that I was thinking about, when because I was a huge fan of the Beatles and Ringo Starr, of course, too. And listening back, the story that when they stopped touring was not much before Woodstock. And one of the big reasons why they stopped touring was they couldn't hear themselves.
Yes.
They had the amplification. They would look like lip read each other, and they stayed together, which is miraculous. I don't know how they
Yes.
did that. So they stopped touring 65, 66, and Woodstock at 69. So a lot changed in those years because when we listen to Woodstock, it was the same level of sound that we're used to now, generally. The drums sounded great. I don't know if I think you were using double heads, but the sound of the drums was amazing. How they recorded that live.
Well, that's a pretty interesting story too. You should have on Eddie Kramer sometime because Eddie Kramer was the engineer at Woodstock, and he said it was a disaster. I mean, uh, either they couldn't see from where they were engineering, and there was some chance they weren't hearing things. And he'd always be running up on stage during performances and fixing mics and that sort of thing. I don't recall it being a problem, but um, sound in those days. Well, yeah, there was not by now there were monitor mixers and things like that. So that's what makes all the difference. And but I know for us, we play as pretty tight. We don't go to the edges of the stage. We go tight and we play to each other. We never thought of ourselves like entertainers. Let's put it that way. So we were playing to each other. If we got each other off, then we knew that it would be fine for the people. So
Right, right.
we were constantly, um, kicking each other's ass. And that was a good thing. I mean, boy, man, I tell you, like that group was. You had to have some thick skin in that group. Let's put it that way. I mean, all the guys, they'd make fun of you. If they'd make fun of you anyway. But um, that was good. It was a good experience for me. It's like being in kind of tough guys group.
Right. And also
I'm sure it's like that in Cuba. It's some serious shit, right?
oh
I
yeah,
mean,
yeah.
it's like if you don't pass the muster, you just don't, and
Oh
it's
no,
like
it's
it's being like the black sheep in the litter, It's like
well
sorry,
you don't I mean you don't last long if you're not at the level and at Cuba especially because the level there is so high and it's so you have mass. It's not just a few people that are great. Like many are great because of all the training and the education and the cultural support that they get. So when you get on a stage, I remember once Piloto with his band Climax. In the beginning, once he invited me on stage. Oh, Aldo, come on up, and they sounded like incredible. So I went up. I knew a few of their songs. So they played something they thought I knew, and I'm sitting at the drums, and they start playing, and I can't hear anything,
oh,
you know, and I'm saying to myself, oh man, I don't hear. All I hear is the rumble. I don't hear
oh,
anybody. I don't hear the voices. The monitors were for the audience. They're not hearing anything. So this is a 16-piece band, right? Two
geez.
percussionists, horns, two keyboard players, three singers out front, like massive energy, and I'm just like by the skin of my teeth and sweating like crazy, and
Yeah,
wondering how do they do this? How are they so tight, so energetic, and they just play at a level. And God help anybody who's off.
yeah, yeah.
There's no reason for it because we're all there. If somebody comes in and is new, well, they better be ready. So I can
How'd you
imagine.
do? How did it end up?
Well, it ended up okay, but man, it was a really good lesson for me because we,
Yeah,
we tend to not complain, but I don't because I say whatever it is, it is. So, oh, I couldn't hear my monitors. Oh, can you turn this up? When we spend hours obsessing over that, and I'm saying they don't have any of this. Nobody ever complains. Nobody asks for anything. They're just here you go. And I
yeah,
look back at ourselves and I say, boy, we're so weak. we're
uh,
no weak
I
in the sense like we just want this to be in the studio perfect. Well, it's not always going to be perfect.
yeah, yeah.
They just got to serve.
I understand that I've been in that situation where you step on stage and it's like, whew, you've stepped into like a raging river,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh man, I mean, really, it's flowing. And if you don't go in there right, I mean, oh God, I know that feeling. I mean, I don't know why it just came back to me. I know that fear,
Sure, sure. And then you're in survival mode because
Yeah,
that's all it is. And there's nobody who's gonna be forgiving because here's the music. Be with us.
yeah,
On.
yeah,
Anyway, an interesting thing is you say you were a rock drummer, not a drummer, jazz drummer mainly, but you did some work with the Stones. Weren't you on one of their albums and some other
yeah,
projects like that?
yeah. I was, yep, there they are up there, those three. But I was just hanging around. I've become friends with Mick and Charlie, and they used to come see us in Santana and in London, and you know, I was invited to Mick's wedding in south of France with Bianca, and so we knew each other. And I was living in New York, and it was okay if I went to the studio. And Chris Kimsey, the producer, was a good friend of mine, and so I was just there, and it was just some percussion I played. Nobody plays drums with the Stones except Charlie. And so it was just one of those right place, right time. But I did also play on Mick Jagger's first solo album, and just on
Nice.
one track. Um, but he flew me down to Nassau for that. But on the one track is Pete Townsend, Herbie Hancock, uh, Jeff Beck, and somebody else. And that's an old rock and roll group. Like one of those old, lum de like,
Right,
and that's
right.
kind of like almost like Good Lovin', but not the bell, It really wasn't something else, but at any rate, um, and I also played like I did that record with Sammy Hagar and Neil Sean, which is a rock record. Um, but even Sammy Hagar in his autobiography said, "Yeah, we got Mike Shrieve for that." I mean, he's a great rhythmical drummer, but he's not really a rock drummer. It was kind of a put down, but I got it completely. I mean, it's true. I didn't take offense. It's like you know you are who you are, um, and I can play some rock stuff, but not compared to those guys. You know,
John Bonham or yeah.
Yeah, I mean Bonham or even guys like who was I? Who did I take a lesson from? The drummer that plays with Alice Cooper. Uh I'm spacing on the name, but
You
he's
had
a
a number
great
of them.
drummer. Great drummer, man. And so he came to Seattle, and I no, I did a drum thing with a ton of other drummers, like called Woodstock here in Seattle, where they have 100 kids set up their drums and play a big beat, and then they have all these other drummers there. Um, So there was some real heavy hitters, and I was very impressed because I had just come from a reunion rehearsal with Santana. Like it was about 5, 6 years ago, and by this point, between Carlos Santana and Neil Schon, oh my God, it's so loud. You know, it's so loud. There's no way I could play like I used to play in the early '70s with them because I could have a jazz touch. You know, okay, you need that energy, you need that, but the sheer volume of where it had gone to was, and so that's why I had a lesson. I say, how can I play louder? What can I work on for my single strokes? Because nobody hears my double strokes, and and so I tried it, but it's always good to learn new things. But in the end, as you get older, you realize you know, you don't have to be all things. You just have to be you to the max. And that's really what the world wants from any artist is for them to really amplify who they are themselves. And that's the journey
Yep.
is to is to really dig in and say what moves you and what do you really want to move towards. What moves you musically, and then what how do you fit into that drum wise, and that's what you should work on. You don't have to be all things. And in fact, if you really want to be an artist, you have to dig deep and be unique unto yourself. It's the best way, I think, to now that's the best way to be an artist. Now, all musicians don't necessarily consider themselves artists, like an individual painter like Picasso or, so many people. But that's where I live, in that the journey to find myself over and over again, and realizing that you're never going to get there, but that's the journey you should make.
Yeah. No, it makes total sense because some people, I mean, cast a very wide net. I mean, if you want to work and play with many
Yes.
situations or be curious about it. I've always, I mean, I was a rock drummer, then I studied jazz and classical percussion, and I just my net got super wide just because I was interested in that, and I
Yeah.
was like three different people. And practicing, of course, 8, 10 hours a day at the same time, and playing, to no end all the time.
Were you
But
practicing
others,
10 hours a day?
oh yeah, oh yeah. I mean, when I went to a camp once, and I got into. I was a rock drummer, couldn't read, and I wanted to go into this seriously. And I went to a camp. It was the Ludwig Percussion Symposiums, which I modeled the whole COSA experience on. And I said I
Uh-huh.
want to take it up a whole other notch because what it did for me
Yeah.
was amazing. So here I met Joe Morello, the whole jazz thing, and I had been listening to Dave Brubeck, couldn't understand half of it. Now I'm starting to understand Carmine Appice, in that world. Then Gary Burton, who taught me how to hold four mallets. Then I was teaching
Uh-huh.
everybody else how to hold. Then I got serious about it, and did a whole classical degree in percussion, and I have a double degree in classical, in jazz, and graduate studies in ethnomusicology. Just because,
Really?
just got so interested in everything, and I said I'm going to need 3 lifetimes, but that's okay. Let's see how far this can go.
Wow, man, that's really admirable. I really wanted to go back and here at the University of Washington in Seattle, they have really a great ethno program, and I thought it would be perfect for me to slip
Sure.
into that area, because naturally, like, playing this music that I've played makes me causes me to research all of this other music. And but the
Yeah.
ethnomusicology I've always found to be really an exciting area of study, as well as um, what's it called? Social anthropology.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's a
And
really interesting area for me as well.
no, and it's interesting because I mean, you were 20 years old when you were at Woodstock, and by then you were already a high-level performer, but you were in a context, a crossroads, and a breeding ground for all of this music. And certainly,
Yeah,
San Francisco,
yeah,
I'm sure, like Montreal or New York City, is one of those places where everybody and everything is actually there in front of you. And I'm sure you had such a curiosity. I mean, you could tell in your eyes when you watch that clip, and all the things that you've done since, that you've always been curious. So I
yeah.
think I think it's
I
that's
mean,
it.
having to do that solo every night, and I'd come up with jazz drummers. So I was modeling them after jazz drummers and rock drummers solo. But then my interest went somewhere else, and I wanted to explore outside of that. And I was in a record store in Berkeley, California, and there was this music coming out of it was like metal, like not heavy metal. I mean, literally metal, you know, banging against walls, this, that. And in those times, they used to display the record they were playing, right?
Okay.
They put it on a thing and it was this guy, like on a whole stage full of percussion, all kinds of percussion. And he was leaping in midair with a timpani stick in his mouth, hair down halfway in his back. And I said, who is this guy? And it was Stomu Yamashita. And so Stomu was this amazing Japanese percussionist that was that day I bought everything they had, and he was a guy that was trained in Japan and the States, Berkeley, Oberlin, and then I mean he was so different that there were great classical composers like Hans Werner Henze was composing pieces for him to perform. And when he performed, he was also very dramatic, like that, and like a samurai, or like Tai Chi or something. So he was amazing to watch as well. And I just pursued this guy. I mean, for over a year, I was pursuing him. I ended up in last day of a Santana tour in Rome, and since I'm always like asking, uh, I found out that he was staying in the same hotel, and so I knocked on his door, and I arranged a meeting. And I knocked on his door, and he was about 5 feet tall, and he's like stature of a 10 foot tall person, and hello. And by the end of 2 hours, we were both rolling on the floor, laughing, and kind of perform. We just hit it off like crazy. And so what I wanted to do was avant-garde percussion with him. I wanted to get into. I'm not trained as a classical percussionist, but I'm attracted to. I'm attracted to percussionists, and I listen to all the music. I mean, I still have it up on my CDs, but I wasn't so much into the Keiko Abe thing and the mallets because I didn't play that. So I was really interested in everything else but that. And
Right, right.
anyway, I expressed my interest, and he said, "I'm in the middle of putting together a pop thing, you know." And and I was like, "Oh well, whatever. I'd love to work with you." And it was Steve Winwood, and it was
Al Di Meola was
Al
on
Di
that project.
Meola and
Right,
Klaus
right.
Schultze. And so now Klaus was a very different thing than I had ever encountered, and so that was another magical. I love like pursuing people. Like I pursued Evelyn Glennie for 4 years. I flew down to San Francisco, had dinner with her. She came up here. Got a tour of the Paul Allen's like Hendrix Museum before it was open, and we were all set to record. And then she said, "Michael, I just can't. The Seattle Symphony is performing pieces that I have commissioned, and I just I can't." And I said, "I understand, if you," but I really wanted to do something with her. Um, and so I enjoy pursuing these people that are on these different paths. So, but I do have a record coming. I'm just finishing up the artwork now. That's It's percussion based, but it's also with Airto and Jack DeJohnette and
Wow.
Zakir and Trey Gunn and Pete Lockett and some other people, even a track with Amon Tobin. Do you know Amon Tobin?
I don't know. No, no.
He's more like an electronic guy or
Okay.
a sound sculpture guy. And he was living in Toronto for years. Anyway, he's still one of my favorite artists. And we ended up doing something together. So that's on there as well. But it's called Drums for Compassion, um, based off of course, Olatunji's Drums of Passion.
Right.
And Olatunji gives the invocation for the whole start of the record. And so, I'm still interested in percussion music, but I look in the corners.
Nice, nice. Yeah. No, and that curiosity is, I mean, I think it's important and it's what pushes us, right? I mean, I remember actually when you and I met, it was at the
Nova
Cape,
Scotia.
yeah, Cape Breton
Yeah.
Festival, where I was there with a whole bunch of my own heroes and people I looked up to. I mean, there was yourself, there was Denny Serafine, there was Alan White was there,
Yeah.
a whole bunch of people, and I was just, I mean, in awe of all of these people, and also what was the um, what's his name, who was the mallet player for Frank Zappa, who was also there with us.
Ian Underwood.
And no, uh, oh,
Oh
it's
yeah,
just
Ed Mann.
Ed Mann. That's right.
Yeah,
So while I was doing my whole hybrid thing that I was presenting at
yep,
that concert, and
yep.
then so I said to Ed, I said, why don't we play without rehearsal? And I was, and I do a lot of that, just improvising without saying a word. We set up and we play. I've done that with Anders Astrand and a number of other people, and it was, I still have the footage of that. That was fabulous
That
with
was
Ed.
wonderful. Yeah,
Yeah, that was so much fun, and
that
I
was.
understand this, and I think it's beautiful to see that. I mean, you have larger horizons than you've projected. When I say projected, that I didn't see before. That's great to see. Out curiosity.
Yeah, I mean, as I'm getting older, I feel it in my hands and everything, and arthritis is coming on. And sometimes when I play, I stiffen up, I mean, it's like really lock up and it scares the hell out of me. And so you know, you try to do stuff. I took a whole course on, foods that anti-inflammatory foods and stuff like that. But to make sure I can continue to make music, I have been really earnestly in the last couple of years learning the music software like Logic, and so that no matter what happens to me physically, that rhythm never leaves you inside, and so I'm still able to make music. Um, by using the tools that are there. And frankly, it doesn't bother me. I don't care as long as I can make the music. I am doing some dates in Europe in the fall, but for the most part, I don't really care. I just want to make music. So I'm in my studio at least 6 hours a day, working on new stuff you know, that's exciting to me. I mean, that's
Nice.
exciting, right? I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah. And also, I mean,
I love it. I mean, I don't feel like I'm not stuck in the past, and I still have the curiosity to find new music, which I find most people my age don't do that, you know. And I just adore it. I mean, I just love finding like the jazz scene that's going on in London now is really great. I'm a real fan of many of the Northern European musicians, you
yeah,
know,
yeah.
and and I've got two sons and one's a, songwriter producer in LA, and they keep me up with, really cool stuff. And, even the hip hop stuff, it's so fun to play to.
Right, right, right. And the thing, what you're basically saying is like all of us realize, in our minds, your mind is still that 20-year-old.
Yeah.
Is the
Yeah.
rest that has ages, but not your mind. And if you,
Yeah.
especially with music, it really keeps us sharp,
Yeah.
and and it's coming from within. So that's great. But I mean, speaking of composers, I mean, you've written a lot too. You had co-written some songs with Santana, and you also did some film
Yeah.
scoring.
Yeah. You know, again, I'm not trained, but I mean, I did take a lot of drum lessons when I was younger. And I did take a couple of years of music in junior college. But, the way I look at it, Aldo, is I write a lot of lyrics too.
Okay.
I really enjoy that. Like I'm writing lyrics to um, Pat Metheny tunes, Bill Frisell tunes, even like some instrumental, well-known scores that are just unbelievable melodies. So I write lyrics and I spend a lot of time on them, and some of them have been recorded, and it's God, I really enjoy that. Here's the thing: if you find a classic instrumental piece of music by a great artist like Frizzell or Pat Metheny, who plays like a vocalist anyway, and you get great lyrics to it, you can't miss. I mean, I sent the stuff to Pat with a singer I put on one of his tunes, and he said these are the best lyrics anybody's written to my music.
Wow.
And so that's another thing I'd like to pursue more because I've done it all my life. I mean, really, I studied English literature as well as music. So I always had an aspiration to be a writer. Um, and so I've always, kept notebooks full of stuff.
Nice, nice. And what are like some of the other projects that I mean, this one is coming out. That's just nice to hear. I'm really looking forward. I want to hear this one. This is interesting. And what are
I'll
some of
send
the
it.
other things you
I'll
hope
send
to
it to
do?
you. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, beautiful. Thank you. What are some of the other things that you're looking to do? I mean, I don't know if before you answer that, it's like I'm thinking myself. You're at a point where you say, okay, I've have all these interests. Now I want to get all of these things like out the door. Like, come on, guys, don't just sit there. I want to push this and I want to push that. And one of the things in my case was, I mean, over the years I have inventions and things I have invented, created, and I never had time to file, for
Patent.
patents and all that because it's so laborious and long. So I had many of these things sitting around, many other things that were just sat there. So with the past couple of years of not being able to travel so much and do all
Yeah.
these things, it kind of forced me. I said, okay, now it's time to get these things out the door. So the patents are coming. I have
Good.
a music stand that Manhasset is launching this fall.
Really?
And these are like amazing, like game changers. And I have another series that I can't talk about yet of percussion things and other things that I've been wanting to do for years, and now we can. Now, we're not 20 years old, but the mind says, got to do this, right?
Yes. Yes. So, yeah, I can speak to that very much. I mean, even this record that I'm putting out, I started it 20 years ago, and it's one of those things where, I mean, the self-talk is really amazing. I even went to a shrink once and trying to figure out what's wrong with me, and I came to the conclusion with this record, my hesitation for releasing it was it's so important to me. I like it so much that you know how it is. You put a record out and it's like nobody cares. Nobody. It's like dropping the And so I'm afraid, to be frankly, that it'll just be a thing in the ocean. But that's ridiculous. So now it's coming out. The other thing is what I'm doing, which just like you said, it's very difficult to you know, what do you do with stuff? So I have a good friend who for years has been telling me, you got to put this stuff out. You got to do this. So I have started a Bandcamp page and I'm populating it with all kinds of things. I've got a DAT machine here and I've got a cassette machine and I'm going, you see over there those cassettes and stuff and DATs. I mean, I've got all kinds of old stuff like outtakes records with Andy Summers and David Torn and um,
Nice.
all kinds of stuff. And I've got drum solos from Santana because I used to record every night with a little, Sony recorder. And so I'm cleaning those up. I'm going to present those and all kinds of things that it's a lot of old stuff, but it's got to be archived and it should be made available. And it takes work and energy unless you have a staff, which I don't. So, but I realize it's kind of fun too, to go back. I mean, I've got the stuff you discover. And so I'm putting it up into the computer and I'm using these programs in Logic that are, like there's a program called Easy Mix from Tune Tracks who put out Superior Drum 3 and other stuff. But you can try different mixes, like different effects chains made by well-known producers and engineers, and you put your music in there. And it's like, oh my God, or I send it to somebody to clean it up or something like that. And so I'm starting to release, I just put out one 2 days ago that I did that's completely electronic, completely like from 2002. I mean, yeah, 2002, something like that. Um, and nobody's ever heard me do something like that. It's with a trumpet player playing through effects and me just with a rack of stuff and you know And so I'm putting the stuff out, which feels good. And at
Yeah.
the same time, I'm working on brand new music. After I had back surgery, I couldn't come into this music room because you can't bend over, you can't reach, you can't do anything. I was frightened, you know how it is. You're going to bend over, you know, you're going to plug the cord in, you drop a drum key, you know, something.
And
I
then you can't
tried,
get up.
yeah. I mean, I have a one of those reacher things and stuff like that, but I couldn't be in here for 3 months, so I just brought the computer, a small keyboard, and a really interesting rhythm machine, and went in the house and started composing an album. And then I brought in another guy, and it's really turning out great. You know, I do a lot of electronic stuff, and I just, you know, the way I look at it is, as long as you're engaged and you're happy doing it. I mean, I tell my wife, you know, we may move. I said, here's what it is, sweetheart. All I want to do is be out there working, you know? All I want to do is that. And
And
so I want you to be in a place where you can go out and, you know, you're not waiting for me. You can go out and enjoy yourself and stuff, and we can have dinner somewhere at night. You know, I mean, I just want to, I really enjoy it. And it's not so much like I'm playing the drums, it's like I'm making music on the computer, you know, with a lot of electronic stuff. And
yeah.
I can play this. I mean, I'm really excited by the possibilities. So,
Beautiful. And I'm really happy to hear that you're getting this stuff out there. I had the same kind of experience, and I'm sure many of us took that opportunity. Imagine over 27 years of COSA, we archived, we filmed everything. And over 40 years of my group, Repercussion, touring all over the world, including a concert with Keiko Abe in Japan, in Tokyo,
so your
where
group
we,
is Repercussion?
Repercussion, yeah.
Wow, how did I miss that you were
Well,
involved in that?
I'll send you some
I'm
things.
familiar with the group.
Yeah. And so we did all of these things like trailblazers. I mean, we were crazy. And it was like the Pink Floyd of the percussion ensemble. We said, we don't want to play in orchestras. We're rock drummers, and that it's in our heart. So let's take that out. So that's what we did all over the world. And we're still doing it. The last concert we did was in Havana just before COVID, Repercussion with the Havana Symphony, you know.
Wow.
You know, so so now during this time where we were in lockdown, I said I got to digitize everything, and it's got to be out there. And this is like
Yeah.
monumental project, but
Yeah.
it's going to be out, and I'm so
It's
happy you're
got to be
doing that.
done, Aldo. It's got to be done, and only you can make it happen. You know, it's listen. I've got a book on Elvin Jones that you know, that I'm finishing up and trying to find somebody. It's interviews with Elvin. I followed him like
Wow,
to Greece. I stayed with him in Keiko for a week and just studied all day, and then at night would ask him questions. Um, and I went to his hometown. I mean, I gave the eulogy at Elvin's funeral.
wow, okay,
Yeah, that's how
wow,
close we were. And I've got that's got to get out, you know.
yeah,
And I've also got film stuff of him um, that I paid for, and you know, multi-camera shoot. That's got to get out.
sure,
You know, it's like, okay, what we need is a big whiteboard in our room, right?
yes,
And we need incredible discipline to allocate our time to be able to not just maintain who we are anyway between exercise and drumming, and but to make these things happen, you know.
yeah.
And all I want to do is make new music. So all this
Hey,
stuff's like old stuff, right? And so it's really hard for me to, you know, get away from making stuff now to pay attention to the stuff, but it's got to be done.
of
You
course,
know?
and you know, and these are the kind of things that wake you up at night and get you up early in the morning, so
Yeah,
that you can get you know,
yeah,
time is of the essence sometimes. So,
yeah.
you
We're
know,
not getting younger. Yeah,
no, it doesn't take much, you know, that not just that, but it doesn't take much to deviate us from that, because health is like number one. If you don't have that, the rest is moot. But
right.
if that's on track, then you got to fast forward, and you're in the right space. I'm glad to hear it. I'm not the only one. I'm hearing it from other friends who, when I mentioned this, they're saying I'm doing the same thing. I said, "Oh, this is great." So we were given the gift of time to do those things. So thank you for doing that. I think a lot of people will be happy.
It's you know it it's important, I think, for an artist like who's been working steadily on different projects for years, that you take some time and like revisit it and see, okay, wow, where I used to be so super critical, which is why I wouldn't put it out. I'm saying there's value in this. You can edit, you can do anything you want, but still there's value in it. Whereas before I was hypercritical, and I
Yeah.
realized that sometimes you got to get past yourself. People might really be interested in this.
It's inspiration, and it's important that they hear it because they won't hear it the same way you do, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
important that they hear it and they get whatever side of the coin they see and perceive, that it does it for them. I mean, in anything we do, we don't know how we're influencing somebody or how somebody is influencing us,
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah.
always surprising, but it's there for sure.
It's interesting, really, when it comes down to it, really what you're doing is you're opening your heart, you know, you're opening your heart, you're accepting yourself more than you used to. Like, instead of always criticizing, you open it and you accept it, and then you offer it, and that's a spiritual act in itself.
Yeah, yeah, and you were given this gift, can't keep it. Cannot be selfish with it. It's got to be out there,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, listen, Michael, it's such a pleasure. I've learned so much more about you than I thought I knew, and thank you for taking
And
the
me,
time to
and me,
do this.
me the same. Repercussion, man. I've got discs of yours. I mean, I've got a whole thing like this of just percussion and percussion groups, and you know. Are you a fan of Ellen Glennie?
Oh yes, we're good friends. In fact, when she came to Montreal, she was doing a concert with the Montreal Symphony, and all of a sudden she called me in a panic. Her hi-hat clutch, it was not working an hour before the concert, and my studio was like 5 minutes from the concert hall. So she called me, and I said, I ran over and I said, well, here it is. So she was all set up. And then at one point, I think, yeah, no, we ran into each other in New York. I mean, we crossed paths,
Yeah. Yeah.
because she traveled a lot, of course, and so did I with the group, and we would cross paths, and we always had through the idea of eventually doing something, but people get so busy, it's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just
Yeah. She's amazing. She's just amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, and she led the way not only as a percussionist, and when I saw her the first time without her shoes, I'm saying, well, that's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah.
But the fact that she feels the vibrations,
Yeah.
and then I said, let's take that further. I started doing experiments where we would do concerts, and I would ask everybody to take off their shoes and see what they're hearing, not just from the ears, but the bones that are touching the ground. It's a wood floor, and it's really interesting because we're conductors in the sense of we conduct
Right.
sound and
Right.
and vibration, and I thought that was really interesting. Yeah, so she's done a lot of work, and
She's done a lot of work. I
you have
know.
to
I
give
mean,
her a lot of credit.
watching her come on stage as a guest with the symphony there, and you see this wee thing, and the power that she has. It's just, I mean, visually, it's just remarkable.
Yeah,
Just this force with all these players, and how she's carved a different path. It's remarkable. That's what I
yeah.
was talking about. Like, that's what we need. That's our gift, to be ourselves. You know, and like as usual with the great artist, she has done that. It's a hard road to travel.
But
You know,
yes, and I think what you come away with is each one. Once you're convinced, you say, this is my podium. This is what I'm going to do, and I can do it. And you're moving forward. I mean, just like
yeah,
yourself, just like all of us, find
yeah,
that thing, and that's what keeps you going forward. And that's what
yeah,
you get up in the morning for. Every day you
yeah,
look forward to it, right? So
yeah,
it's
yeah. I
because
mean,
you've done it and you've kept doing it and you're still
yeah,
on it, no matter how wide or narrow what you're doing is. You're still you, and
yeah,
you're opening doors. You're
yeah.
opening imaginations. You're sparking ideas. That should never end.
No, there's no reason for it not to. I mean, unless you lose your curiosity. I think that would probably be. I think that's one of the, aside from health, one of the key things is to keep your curiosity. Don't be stuck where you were most successful, or don't be stuck, or you know, and don't be so snobby. I've been a snob in my youth. I was a snob, and it's like, you know, I won't even say, but letting that down has introduced me to stuff that everybody else loved that I always didn't like, and I realized, this is something to keep track of, because you missed out on this just because of your attitude. You
Yep.
know,
And insecure, that which brings you more insecurity than anything else. At the end of the
yeah. So
day,
just like, okay, open yourself up, and life can be more interesting.
absolutely. Anyway, Michael, I can we can stay all day and weeks.
I
This
understand.
is
Yeah.
too interesting. We have to do this again. But I thank you so much for taking the time, and I am so grateful that you did. And I always say, to be continued.
Very good. Thank you so much, Aldo.
Thank you.